Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Omid G.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me here. Again, my name is Omid G. It's my pleasure to be here at this prestigious procurement conference in Europe. And what we're going to talk about today is transforming procurement into a value-added center of profit. And there's going to be key points that we discuss today, and it's all going to be about things that we've seen and I've seen inside companies that are consistently broken that we could be doing better. And so let's kind of dive into it. And by the way, I'm the CEO of the Procurement and Supply Chain Management Institute, PSCM Institute for short. And just a little bit about myself. I won't read all of this, but I will say I spent 18 years at Intel Corporation. And I will never forget my very first day there. I came out of college with my master's degree in business, and there was a room full of procurement people, first-time procurement people, and I had no preparation for this profession. And at the end of the day, the orientation session, I asked, what is the training program for new procurement professionals? And the vice president of procurement got closer to everybody and said, sink or swim. Any questions? And this made me so angry, and it is what puts me in front of you today, because this profession can do better. Again, I think it was mentioned, I've worked with a lot of the Fortune 100, written several books, a number of procurement articles, work regularly with Harvard University, and I started the only procurement curriculum in the state of California out of 117 community colleges, because we need to be better prepared for this profession. We cannot keep experiencing baptism by fire. And so the State of the Union, and before I get to that, I also won't read my recognitions, but I've been lucky enough to receive some of these over the years. And from 2022, 2023, just some of the recent ones. But what I'd like to talk about is not about me. Let's talk about you. The State of the Union today, and I have a question for you. And by the way, I've been asking this question for 30 years in front of probably 30 or 40,000 procurement professionals at conferences. How many of you did all of the following things? First off, you planned to be in procurement coming out of high school. You knew this was where you wanted to be in high school. Then you pursued an education in procurement as a part of your plan coming out of high school. Then you got a job in procurement per your original plan. How many of you can say you did this? Can anybody? Now, how many people landed in procurement by accident? Okay, that's everybody in this gigantic auditorium. And ladies and gentlemen, I've been asking this question in 30 countries. Do you know how many people over 30 years have raised their hand? 4 people. 4 people I've met who plan to be in profession. This is the only profession on earth that's completely assembled by accident, okay? And that's the bad news. And what that means is we all come in, and how did we learn how to do procurement? Well, from TV and from our parents and from all these different things. Because I got 2 degrees in business and I didn't take a class in procurement. I didn't read a book on procurement. I didn't read a sentence with the word procurement in it. This is the bad news. We're assembled by accident. The good news is this is the easiest profession on earth to become a rock star in. And so that's what we're going to talk about today, is how, and chief procurement officers, I'm talking to you. We're going to focus on how to be a rock star, how to position procurement organizations as value-added centers of profit. And I want to tell you a story. You know, in some countries that keep elephants, they have this habit where when the elephant is very, very young, they put shackles around the elephant's feet, around just 1 foot. And the elephant is small, it's not strong enough to break the shackles. Then as the elephant gets older, they continue to put the shackles, only larger ones. And by this time, the elephant is strong enough to break the shackles. However, the elephant is still holding on to the mindset from when it was a child that I cannot break these shackles. And so it never tries. And in so many ways, this is procurement. Today, we're going to break out of these shackles. And so I have a question for you. And the question is a challenging one, and one that I want you to think about deeply. Are we perceived? And perception is all that matters. I don't care about what we actually are. Are we perceived as a cost-generating back-office function, or are we perceived as a value-added center of profit? Right? And in almost every case, procurement will say, well, we're a value-added center of profit. But it's not important what procurement says. It's important what the CEO says. And the bottom line is, the CEO views the company very simply. You are either a profit and revenue generator or you are not. It's that simple. And procurement today sits in the back office. We sit in the back office as a cost generator. I'm talking about perception. And until we change this, we will never have a seat at the table with the executive staff. So what we're going to talk about today is 3 things for the chief, and I met a number of chief procurement officers in this room just right before the session. This room is full of them. We're going to talk about 3 things that I'd like for you to start doing differently. And the reason I'm talking about these 3 is because I have been inside the Fortune 100 companies and the Fortune 500 companies, and they are not doing these things and not doing them well, with some exceptions here and there. And we talk about supply chain, and we talk about all these different things. These are strategic endeavors, but it is not what's keeping us awake at night, and it is not what is holding us back from procurement greatness. The very first thing we're going to talk about is shifting from buying goods and services to buying performance results. I promise you, this is going to be an eye-awakening topic. And by the way, on this topic alone, I spend up to 5 days with companies, nonstop, 5 full days solving this problem and helping them redo their procurement processes so it's focused on the singular acquisition of performance results. And I'll tell you why this is killing you today in a minute. The next thing is to start achieving savings in end-user product and service design. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is where the money is, and we'll talk about that. And it's not where we're looking for the money. And then finally is to leverage value creation strategies with suppliers. And I'll explain further what that means, but essentially it's finding out what keeps your suppliers awake at night and how can you produce proposals that will help them solve those problems in return for significant cost savings opportunities. So these are the 3 paths to Chief Procurement Officer greatness and to procurement department greatness. And so we'll start with the first one, which is shifting to buying performance results instead of buying goods and services. Now, I'm going to surprise you with this sentence, but I will argue this with any person in this room. In fact, any person on the planet Earth that wants to argue this with me, I'm ready. What I see day in and day out, and nobody is talking about this. I challenge you to find any place on the internet where even one person is talking about this. The number one problem in procurement today is not what you think it is. It's not, whatever you think it is, it's not that. The number one problem in procurement today is that we're buying goods and services instead of performance results. Our entire procurement process is architected towards the acquisitions of goods and services. And goods and services, in my book, are a terrible thing. Because, and if you don't believe me, during the break, I can give you a haircut. You will receive a haircut. But whether or not it's going to be, it won't be the performance outcome you desire. I promise you that. But you will receive a haircut. That's a service. If you think about all the mistakes you've made in procurement that you regretted, it was always because you bought goods and services instead of performance results. Or if you look at why your end users complained. Now, let me share with you a quote that a procurement professional provided me with. I go into work, and I'm wondering if you can relate to this. I go into work every day with an idea of what's on my plate, but then somebody gives me a serving of something else. Does this feel like your job? Does this feel like what's happening to you? What I want you to know, this figure will shock you. You and your people, your departments, are spending 70 to 90% of every day in unplanned activities. I don't even have to talk to you. I've been doing this long enough that I can tell you. I don't have to ask you anymore. You and your people are spending 70 to 90% of every day in unplanned activities, and that's a tremendous waste of the organization. It's happening because of this. And by the way, I lied to you. A procurement professional did not tell me this. I was watching one of those true crime shows, and a homicide investigator said this. Okay, now a homicide investigator has the right to say that, I go into work and because somebody gets murdered, they have to drop everything and go after the murder. They can't plan murders unless they're the ones doing them, right? But procurement people should not be able to agree with this sentence. We should be spending 10 to 20% of every day in unplanned activities. The root cause is that we're buying goods and services. And so let's look at how this cycle goes. The end user develops a scope of work or spec for goods and services. And by the way, there's the end users, there's no such thing as having a bachelor's degree in end userism, right? They have no more training than you did going into their profession. So they develop a scope of work and spec for goods and services. Then you send out a bid for goods and services. Then you contract for goods and services. And the template itself says this is a contract for goods and services. The whole process is set up for failure. Then you receive goods and services. Then the end user complains because what they actually wanted was performance results. And if you like to think about it, ask yourself how many times did the end user receive exactly what they asked for, yet they're still unhappy, right? This happens all the time. And so it's hugely problematic. Now I'm going to go through some examples to try and exemplify this. One of my clients was the state of Wisconsin, or rather one of the counties. So I was working with them, and then what did I find out? They wanted to upgrade all of their traffic lights to LED. They wanted to go green, right? Everybody wants to go green. We have a presentation today about going green. So they changed all of the traffic lights to LED during the summertime. Well, it gets very, very cold in Wisconsin, just like it does here. In fact, I froze for a couple of nights here. So it gets extremely cold there. What did they find out? First of all, LED is not a performance result. It's a good and service. You're buying it and you're having it installed. But in and of itself, LED is not a performance result, right? What did they find out? LED does not melt snow. And so now they have an entire staff of people whose only job it is to clean off traffic lights. And then guess what? Later, I tried to go and find out more about what's the status on this on the internet. I couldn't find anything about Wisconsin. Instead, what I found out is every country in the world that's cold is making this same mistake. Go look it up yourself. Nobody's talking to each other. Everybody's installing LED, and then the winter, they say, oh my God, what did we do? And then now they have snow covering the lights, and they've created a problem because they failed to account for the fact that one of the performance results they wanted was for snow to melt off of the light. Is this starting to resonate with you guys? I have so many examples of this from companies I've worked with. I'm just going to go through a few because of our limited time. One of my other clients, and I give a lot of public procurement examples because I'm allowed to. Everything is transparent with the government, was the city of Jamshedpur, India. And they were trying to make a smart city, the highest tech city that they could. And they had 1,146 light poles in this city, and it was 1-lane roads and 2-lane roads. And then the end user specified that all of the lights should be 125 watts. And so my question for you is 125 watts a performance result? The answer is no. It's not a performance result. It's a specification. So they put in, the supplier did exactly what was asked. They put in the 125-watt light bulbs. What happened? They found out the one-lane roads were overlit, causing a safety issue. And then the two-lane roads had black spots everywhere, causing a safety issue. People might die because of this decision. And so they frantically went back to the supplier, and the supplier, they asked the supplier, they got mad at the supplier. They said, it's not our fault. We did what you asked. And they said, the problem was you asked for wattage instead of for lumens. You were supposed to ask for lumens. And they said, well, why didn't you tell us? And they said, the most dangerous words in procurement. They said, because the bid you sent us said failure to comply shall result in bid disqualification. You forced us to give you a bad solution. And so then they did a lumen study very fast, and they found out that the one-lane roads should have been 90 watts, and the two-lane roads should have been 135 watts. And then they had to pay for the whole thing to be redone. And I don't have to tell you, changing the light on a city street is very different than changing a light bulb in your kitchen. This was a gigantic undertaking. Once again, it's because goods and services were bought instead of performance outcomes. Another one of my clients was the city of Chicago. They were, and these are not actual pictures. These are random pictures from the internet, okay? But the city of Chicago wanted to have security cameras put on the outside of their building. And they contracted with somebody to do that. And then they saw at the end that they had some money left over. And they said, well, we have these interrogation rooms where we interrogate suspects. Can you put a camera inside this room to film the suspects? And that's a very important piece of video, right? Because you prosecute with that video later. You're interrogating the suspect you think maybe committed the crime, committed the murder, whatever. And then you save that video to show it in court and to use it against them, if appropriate. And the security supplier says, sure, we can put a camera in there. Now, once again, I ask the question, is putting a camera inside an interrogation room a performance result? You should know by now. The answer is no. It's not a performance result. It's a good in service. And so what happened was they had a murder suspect in there. He did not yet have an attorney. Now, this is not the real picture. I repeat, this is a random picture from the internet, but it's a good account of what happened. And they asked the guy, what did you do? And he stood up and said, I did like this, showing a stabbing motion, which is highly incriminating. Well, unfortunately, they had just zoomed in the camera on the face where he's sitting down, and so all of that was cut off, and all they saw was his stomach standing up and shaking around. And then later, the city of Chicago told me he got an attorney, and he got off the hook. They weren't able to prosecute him because they did not have him on film doing this motion. All they showed was his stomach moving around. Well, because the performance result was not accurately captured in what was being done here. And if you look at all of the types of emails you get every day and your people get and all the phone calls and all the meetings that get set up, it's all because you're buying goods and services instead of performance results. And you even have regularly scheduled meetings to discuss unplanned activities that are constantly coming up. And so the key is, chief procurement officers, listen to me carefully. When end users come to your people, they want to focus on what they want to buy. And that's the most dangerous place of all to be. Because you need to train your people and tell your people they need to move from what they want to buy and then start discussing how will it be used. From there, you need to move to the end result. And that is where the focus needs to be. And for as long as our procurement organizations stay focused on what they want to buy, we will forever be a back office function in the corporation because we're not solving problems. Instead, we're just focusing on what it is they want to buy. And I repeat, end users do not have a bachelor's degree in end userism. They're just focused on this spec, this scope of work. They're not thinking about teleporting to the future and what problems they're trying to solve. And just remember that end users offer little resistance when buying resources. And by resources, I mean stuff, goods and services, which may or may not be good, but they're the source of endless heartache when they don't like the results. And do you know when you find out that they don't like the results? After they have your money, after the suppliers have your money. And I want you to know the most dangerous day in procurement, or the most important day in procurement, there's the day before a supplier has your money and the day after the supplier has your money. And everything changes in the world of procurement after suppliers have your money. And that's always when you find out end users are unhappy, is after suppliers have your money and there's nothing you can do. Now, I hear a lot about supplier relationship management, and I want to put this to bed. I do not want to talk about supplier relationship management. If the wheels are falling off the bus with the supplier and the CEO is on line one, are you going to tell the CEO, oh, don't worry, we have a great relationship? That's not enough. Supplier relationship management is important, but what I care about is supplier performance management. And this is what our profession should be talking about. SPM. Not SRM. SRM is a subset of SPM. But if you're relying on relationships to keep your business model alive, it's going to be a very long career for you. It's what we should care about is supplier performance management. And so there's 7 deadly sins that I see. Having worked with so many of the Fortune 500, there's 7 things I see them doing wrong. And the first one is thinking supplier performance management starts after the contract is signed. And if you look at every course there is out there on supplier management, it always starts after the contract is signed. This is a big mistake. This is like saying, I'm going to teach my child values after they turn 18. Well, it's too late. It's too late. It starts when the scope of work and spec is being written. That's when you define the performance results, not after they have your money and you've written the contract for goods and services. The next thing is trying to be the best firefighter you can be. And when you spend 70 to 90% of every day in unplanned activities, you are a firefighter. In fact, my experience is we are a profession of firefighters. And this is at the expense of all the great things we could be doing with our capability, with our skills, with our strategies. Because when an end user contacts you and says, I'm not happy with this, then you have to drop all that strategy to go on focus on this. And then sometimes management rewards firefighters, and people say, oh, that person's a great, he or she is very savvy. They're really good at handling these kind of problems. I don't want people who are great at handling problems. I want people who know how to prevent problems. Those are the people we should be valuing inside the company. Then the next thing is putting contracts in place for goods and services instead of performance results is a huge mistake we're making. Then the next thing is not having predefined remedies to perform, for failure to perform. And a remedy is something that's in place in the contract to make you whole again as if the breach never took place. I've written a book on procurement contract law as well. And so we need to have these predefined, that if you make this mistake, this is how you're going to fix it. And it's either going to be money or performance that addresses that. The next one I see very frequently is owning the supplier's success instead of letting the supplier or setting the expectation for the supplier to own their success. You have no idea how many organizations I see that have their suppliers in diapers and they're changing their diapers for them and they're telling them how to do things and now you need to do this and now you need to do that, and they're not leveraging actually the supplier expertise and they're not holding them accountable for performing to that. And then it's allowing, and we talked about this on that graphic, allowing the end user to focus on what they want to buy instead of what they want to experience and what they want to achieve. And then the next one is failing to differentiate between symptoms and root cause with supplier performance excursions. And I'm going to tell you a very quick story. And that story is to differentiate or to explain why it's so important to understand root cause. Years ago, I went to the doctor for a physical. Everything was okay except for my blood work. And my blood work showed I was anemic. And I went to my doctor, and he laughed and said, the labs made a mistake. Guys don't become anemic. And so then he said, we'll do the test again in a month, and it'll show you're not anemic. In a month, I was even more anemic. And so he sent me to a gastroenterologist. This gastroenterologist had an MD and a PhD. He was extremely smart, smarter than all of us combined. And he did all sorts of undesirable tests with me. And then at the end, he said, I can't find the problem. And he said, I want you to start taking iron pills every single day, and then we're going to measure your blood again in 3 months. And I looked at him in the eye, and I said, guess what's going to happen? In 3 months, my iron levels will be normal, and you're going to claim victory, but I will still have an iron problem. I'm not going to take iron pills. I told him that. I want you to solve the root cause. You're addressing the symptom. And he looked at me and said, are you an engineer? And I said, no, I'm not, but I want you to address the root cause. And he knew I had caught him. And so the first message is, the smartest person in the room can make the mistake of addressing the symptom instead of the root cause. He said, I'll call you back. I think he didn't sleep for 2 weeks, and then he called me and he said, are you donating blood? I said, yeah, I'm donating blood every month. He said, I'm going through all this expensive testing to find out where your blood is going, and you're voluntarily giving it away. And I said, I don't know. He said, why are you giving away so much blood? I said, I don't know. They call me and I go. Isn't that what I'm supposed to do? He said, stop giving away so much blood, and then we're going to test your blood again. And sure enough, after I stopped donating, my blood was normal. Okay? The smartest person in the room can make the mistake of addressing symptoms instead of root cause. And we do this all the time with suppliers. Now, the secret sauce here, and again, I remind you that I spent 5 days with companies on this, so we're doing kind of a drive-by. But there's 4 legs of the stool. We have to have a mission of the procurement, which is, what are we trying to accomplish overall? These are for large strategic purchases. Then we need to have performance definitions, and every word and term that is related to performance needs to be defined. Then we needed to have results-oriented success metrics. This is a term I made up because people were using success metrics and they were measuring the wrong thing. They were measuring the process. So I wanted to measure the results. And then we need to have the remedies, which we talked about. And then there needs to be pay for performance. These are the components in the 4 legs of the stool that have to be in place. Now, the second thing I want to talk about is to start achieving savings in end-user product and service design. And this section, again, is meant to shock you. Because, ladies and gentlemen, we have been taught that, every year we're getting more and more cost savings goals and objectives, and they're making it harder and harder to achieve. Every year we wonder how we're going to do it. And every year we go back to the same well. We go back to the same suppliers, buying the same things, trying to get them to give us yet another discount. And it's a huge mistake. Not that we shouldn't do that, but we shouldn't stop there. That's only where we start. Here's the shocking news. What my institute has discovered in working with clients is, on average, every time the scope of work spec is handed off. After all, in our business, it's like a baton race. You're telling the end user, do you have it yet? Do you have it yet? I need it so I can run, right? That's the world we live in. Then as we get it, we go and run and take it out to bid, or we go and negotiate. The minute that handoff happens, you've lost, on average, 18% savings opportunities. And are you achieving that in negotiations today? And the answer has to be no. It has to be no. And so why is that 18% number so high? Where is it happening? Well, if you look at this, this is a graphic by McKinsey that shows what percentage of every dollar in revenue that comes to companies goes straight back to procurement expenses. And predictably, the services-based industries have less, and the goods-based industries have more. But what else is this graphic telling you? Well, it tells you that if you want to try and achieve savings by doing what I'm saying, you've got this huge blue ocean where the costs are, to see how can I compress these costs. Because when you tell a supplier, give me a better price, all they hear is make less profit, right? That's what you're telling them. Make less profit so I can report more savings. Then you're spending your time in this little lake on the right-hand side. That's the money you're trying to chase. The real money is on the left-hand side. So keep squeezing suppliers for this money on the right, but it's not where you should stop. It's where you should start. And the real money is on the left-hand side in the cost itself. And your end users are not well versed in making cost-efficient designs. It's just not there. And so how does this 18% happen? The first thing is very frequently, they want to go custom instead of standard, your end users. And listen, my brother is an engineer. I've worked with engineers, and it doesn't just have to be engineers. It's technical people, can be in HR, in marketing, and whatever. Everybody's a technologist of some sort. It just depends on their field. There's no excitement in them saying, I want to buy this item number 6 on page 28 of the catalog. Instead, they want to design something and say, look what I designed. Isn't this incredible? Can you buy me this? This is what I want to get. I made it myself. I'm sure I'm going to get a promotion because of this. Anytime somebody gives you a scope of work or spec, you have to ask them, how did you come up with this? If they say, I did it at my desk, run as fast as you can, change jobs. It's a guaranteed train wreck. The next thing is the design is overly complicated. They make it much more complicated than it needs to be, and that adds costs. Gold plating, where they put in capabilities that are unrequired, not required. Unnecessary bells and whistles and features that they're never going to use or not going to use enough. And then very frequently solving the problem with the wrong solution. All of these things, and by the way, your suppliers 100% know when you're making these mistakes. I promise you they know. So let's take an example. Again, I'm using a public procurement example. I was working with the state of Texas, and I was sitting at a table talking to 3 county purchasing managers. So if you don't know, a county in America, a set of cities are collectively then broken out into counties, and then the counties collectively comprise the state. And so with this particular, these 3 county purchasing managers, I said, why can't you guys collaborate more and act as one? Why are you acting so much as independent entities? And this is what the government does. They're run like 100 million small businesses instead of acting like one. And they just laughed, and I said, give me an example. And they brought up the example of light poles. And they said, all 3 of them independently designed their light poles from scratch. Now, companies who specialize in light poles are defining this is the right kind of light pole for this application, everything. They've got the molding, they've got the setup. And then you have these people saying, no, we're smarter than you. We're going to design our own light poles. And then they ended up being completely custom, 5 centimeters different in height only. Okay, which sounds like not much, but it's an unnecessary difference. Now you've got these companies having to create moldings to account for 5 centimeters difference in height, and completely custom. Not to mention, this is going to be a maintenance fiasco, because now you have to have custom spares, custom everything. Then one of the counties, their engineers required that all city wiring, not just the wiring in that pole, have a special coating applied to it. I didn't even ask what this coating was because I knew it had to be unnecessary. A, the suppliers would have told them if it was necessary. B, the other counties weren't having problems. And then some of the counties designed the light poles to come off of the back of a truck, and others designed the light poles to come off the side of a truck, which I don't even know what that means. But once again, you create cost. Anytime you customize in this way, you're creating all sorts of costs. And I was just thinking, this is crazy. You've created performance issues, you've created cost issues, you've created maintenance issues. And then later, the chief procurement officer of the state of Texas hired me to come work with her staff. And we had a meeting with about almost as many people that are here. The entire procurement organization for the state of Texas was there. And I brought up this example, and somebody stood up in the back of the room and said, you don't understand light poles. I think I got cut off. Somebody said, you don't understand light poles. And my answer was, sir, it is precisely my ignorance that allows me to make this observation. The people who are into this so deep are unable to identify the situation they've gotten them into. But ignorance is your friend, because you can stand and look at a situation and say, no, this is not right. This makes no sense at all. Another one of my clients in Turkey was making turbine engines. It was a turbine engine manufacturer. One of the things that they were doing was they needed lots and lots of oxygen tubes. And they used what was called 9995 oxygen tubes. Now, they were buying a ton of this, and they were paying US dollars, $100 per meter for this. There was only, 9995 means 99.95% pure. Only one company in the world sold it, and it was in Germany. Now, if you want to go back to the prior section, 9995 is not a performance result. It's a spec. While I was there, they ran out of 9995. And the question was, what do we do? And I said, go talk to the supplier. We don't leverage suppliers enough. They went and talked to the supplier and said, what are our alternatives? They said, can we use 9995 for this application? And you know what the supplier said? What are you using this for? You never told us. And so you see, we try to find answers from within instead of going to suppliers. They showed them the schemata, and the supplier said, you don't need 9995 for this. You can use 9995. Whereas 9995 was available from only one company in the world for $100 a meter, 9995 is available everywhere, including down the street from this company for $6 a meter. And so they were going through all these expenditures for an unnecessary requirement. Another one of my clients was a utility company. And I'll kind of shorten the example for the purpose of time, but what we uncovered, we're helping them try and reduce costs. What we uncovered from the supplier was that this company was requiring that their name be stamped every 18 inches on the pipe. Sorry, I didn't convert to centimeters. I think it'd be like 50 centimeters. Every 50 centimeters or so, their company name was being stamped, and then they're burying it a few feet underground, so 1 meter underground. And the company said, we work with so many utility companies. Nobody else does this. Why do you guys want this? You're turning our custom product into a standard product. Pardon me, our standard product into a custom product. You know, we have to have separate manufacturing, separate logistics, separate everything, and we don't want to be in this business. And I said, what is this costing? They said, it adds 30% to the cost, and we don't want it. I was giving this example to one of my clients in Sweden, and they said something so smart. Sometimes there's costs that nobody is profiting from, and that's exactly what was happening here. This was the easiest 30% cost savings ever. The US Air Force had a janitorial contract for decades. And this contract specified all floors must be stripped and rewaxed weekly. Once again, I want to remind you, stripping and rewaxing weekly is not a performance result. It's an activity. It's an activity. It's not an outcome. And this was being done for decades and decades and decades. The entire US Air Force was having their floors stripped and rewaxed weekly. Somebody finally got smart and said, well, that's not really an outcome. What's the outcome we want? The outcome they wanted was to have the scope of work written that floors must be clean, free of scuff marks and dirt, and have a uniformly glossy finish. By changing the contracts to that and letting the suppliers decide how to clean the floors to achieve this outcome, do you know how much money the US Air Force saved on this multi-million-dollar contract? 50% cost savings. Now, if you were the procurement manager for this, you would probably go and try and negotiate for a better price. But that's not where the money is. The money was in the design of the demand to begin with. It was flawed. Now we're going to go to my favorite example of all time. Now, for the sake of protecting the guilty, I'm not going to say what airport this was, but I'll privately tell you during the break. Here is an airport that was built, a new terminal that was built in 2012. And what I'd like you to notice here, so we have the ticket counter on the right, we have the tram, and then we have the gates. And that ticket counter is very high. The tram is very high. I'm just showing that. And if it helps you, there's a propane tanker underneath that's very small looking. Do you see that? So this is an extremely tall ticket counter. The first thing I noticed when I went inside this building was, wow, it's so tall, but it was mostly cubic footage space, which costs a lot of money to build. It not very efficient, and then when you heat it, all the heat goes up. Well, why did it have such a tall ceiling? The only thing I could figure out was this $6 million rabbit that I found in there. Designed, assembled in Germany. Then they found out, I know more about this airport than the people who designed it. Designed and assembled in Germany. Then they found out it wasn't made of the proper fire retardant materials. They had to replace everything and then do it again, then send it over, then reassemble it. Behind this rabbit is the mother of all escalators that goes from the first floor up to the third or fourth floor, so that the tram, for some reason, can go from the top to the bottom. Now, the next thing I want you to notice is that this tram is not straight. It's curved. Curved creates cost. Anytime you do something curved instead of straight, you're creating cost. Now, when I got onto this tram, I noticed something. And now, here's the number one skill you need to have in procurement. Curiosity. Curiosity. If you can be curious, you will solve infinite problems in procurement. I've been doing this in 30 countries, and I'm always in different airports. Anytime I'm in a tram, I'm passing airport space. This was the first tram I'd ever been on that was passing open space. And so I was wondering, why is there a tram? I don't understand this. Why am I passing open space with this tram? That's never happened before. So I got on the internet, and I kept researching, and all I could find out about was how high-tech this tram was. It was driving me nuts. I had to know. Then I didn't sleep for 6 months, and then one day I was in a coffee shop, and lo and behold, sitting next to me is the operations director for the airport. I was just in shock. I couldn't believe it. So I asked him, I said, listen, I need to start sleeping again. I have some questions for you. First I asked him why is the building so tall with so little square footage? It's all cubic footage. He said, well, the airport director, his boss, wanted to leave a legacy. And the way they leave a legacy now is through cathedral ceilings. And I said, okay, fine. And he said also he wanted the tram to go from high to low. So, okay, so probably he should have been, and I said, well, why does it curve? He said, well, he wanted it to curve. I said, well, this guy should have been in the roller coaster business, not in the tram business or airport business. But then I told him about this thing about the tram. It's passing open space. Why is there a tram? And I was expecting to be enlightened. Instead, he looked at his shoes and started shaking his head. And I knew I was onto something. I said, tell me, why is there a tram? He said, I told him we didn't need a tram. Now, don't look at me. I want everybody to look at this screen over here. He said, I told him all we have to do is turn it this way and attach it directly. We don't need a tram. And then what did his boss say? The airport director said, all the best airports in the world have a tram, and we will have a tram. He said, but boss, if we do it this way, then when my people up top are not busy, they can go help the people down here. When the people here aren't busy, they can go help them. If we put a tram, if we put a tram, then I'm going to have to overstaff both functions. All the best airports in the world have a tram, and we will have a tram. He said, but boss, Portland Airport has been rated the #1 airport for 6 years in a row, and it doesn't have a tram. All the best airports in the world have a tram, and we will have a tram. And I said, what did it cost to put this tram? And he looked me in the eye and said, it turned a $500 million airport into a $1 billion airport. Subsequently, I started researching what happened to this airport. They're having so many cost problems. Here's what they've done to try and resolve them. Look at how desperate they are. They've switched from liquid soap to foam soap. They've stopped washing all the windows. And then they reduced the number of shuttles between long-term parking and the airport, making it more inconvenient. Not to mention the tram is inconvenient. And it goes really fast, by the way, in a bad way. If you're not holding on to something, you fall. They've reduced the number of long-term shuttles to long-term parking. But it doesn't stop there. Now, they've realized that there's too many capacity issues, and they just announced that they're going to have to put a walkway underneath the tram that's going to cost another $130 million. So now you've had to double down on a problem and a mistake that was made, and so now you're a $630 million budget problem, which does not account for the maintenance costs, the electricity costs, the personnel costs of running this tram. Ladies and gentlemen, this is where the money is. It's not in squeezing suppliers for a better price. It's for analyzing the demand for streamlining. And so the 4 things that need to be done to be able to accomplish this are simplification of the demand, driving supplier innovation, driving reuse of technology, of proven solutions, and then standardizing what it is that you're buying. And so rest in peace lump sum supplier quotes. They're loved by suppliers everywhere because you never know what's going on underneath. What you need to do, first off, is you need to stop negotiating with salespeople. Chief procurement officers, tell your organization we are no longer negotiating with just salespeople, because all salespeople can negotiate is price and profit, and that's not where the money is. We need to start talking with the people who influence costs, which is engineers, which is logistics, which is manufacturing. These are the people who understand cost and cost drivers. Then we need to start getting line item bids for everything that's a major project, whatever it is, so that you can go through all the costs, you can sort the biggest categories, you can show the suppliers your results-oriented success metrics and say, if I get rid of this cost, which one of my success metrics get impacted? If none of them, then we're getting rid of it. If I get rid of this tram, which one of my success criteria, which are safety, expediency, comfort, all these things, none of them get impacted at that airport. And then you look for opportunities to standardize, simplify, eliminate, and also drive innovation. And I want to share with you the most powerful quote that is the driver behind everything I do in my professional life and quite possibly my personal life as well. And my apologies in advance to the people of France and the country of France. I don't know how to pronounce this correctly, but I think it's something like Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. He was a French author, pilot, poet. He died in a plane crash in 1944, serving his country. And he had books that were written that were translated into 110 languages. And there was a quote in one of the books that took me 5 years to understand. And it's so powerful, and I expect you will not fully appreciate it until later. And that quote is, "Perfection is achieved not when there is nothing more to add, but when there is nothing left to take away." I'm getting chills throughout my body just saying this because it's so powerful. End users want to keep adding things, and I can add this and I can add that. No. Perfection is achieved not when there's nothing more to add, but when there is nothing left to take away. Simplification is beautiful, okay? And that's where we need to drive in procurement. We're going to go to the last one now, which is leveraging value creation strategies with suppliers. And I want to tell you a story. I was in Lebanon on business, and my client surprised me with getting me a package tour of the country. And one of the places they took me was here, and this is Abdul Aziz. And, Abdul Nabi Al-Afi was his name. And on the left, and I'll explain who he is in a second, on the left is the world's largest cut stone. It was an ancient Roman quarry. In fact, when they dug it out, they found out it's the second world's largest stone. The largest was underneath it, which you can see. Now, this is inside a cavernous area inside the middle of the city. And Mr. Abdul had this little gift shop up at the top. And he didn't speak English, but he was older than this picture. He was kind of like this, and he pointed at an article. And I read the article, and it was fascinating. And what it said was, the entire citizens of this city were using this cavernous area as a garbage dump. They were dumping their garbage there. And Mr. Abdul he was a military man. He spent 40 years of his life, every free minute he had, cleaning out this area and getting rid of the garbage. And he was begging the government to do something about it, and they said, we won't. He begged the people to stop dumping, and they said, we're not going to stop. He would go through receipts and find out who's dumping and go to their house and say, don't dump anymore. He did this for 40 years. He had tractors, he had equipment. This was all he did for 40 years. It took him 40 years to finally think to ask the question, why are you dumping? He never asked. He never asked, why are you dumping? Much to his surprise, when he asked the question, he found out they didn't want to dump either. But the problem was they had no place else to dump. Once he found this out, the answer was simple. He created the trash service, and everybody happily used the trash service. The people who couldn't afford, he would pick up their trash anyway with the promise that they wouldn't disclose that they weren't paying. And they never had a garbage problem here again. But he lost 40 years of his life before he thought to ask the question why. And the moral here is we solve problems the wrong way with suppliers all the time. And there's ways to create value with our constituents that solves problems like never before. And that's what happened here. One of my clients was a potato chip manufacturer, and they were always having trouble negotiating with their potato suppliers, with the potato farmers, because there was tremendous demand for these potato products, and they were always coming up against issues with that. And so they thought about it, then thought about it, and we collaborated with them. And I said, what is keeping your suppliers awake at night? And we did some research, and we found out what's keeping them awake at night is that potatoes are harvested 1 month a year, but they have to sell them 12 months a year. So my client came back with the proposal, what if we shift cold storage from your facility to ours because we have space? The suppliers were so thrilled, and the suppliers who wanted price increases came back with, across the board, on average, 20% price discounts because they solved the problem that was keeping them awake at night. That's what value creation is about. It's investigative negotiations to find out what keeps them awake at night and then creating a valuable negotiation asset. Another company I worked with was Ager. Ager was also in Lebanon. They were producing wood buildings for commercial settings. And it had to be a particular type of wood. They had only 2 suppliers. And they found out they noticed one of their suppliers would always have to fly in. They had no local capability. Every time they wanted to meet, they had to fly in. They had no samples they could produce. They had nothing. And so they knew this was keeping them awake at night. Meanwhile, they had just produced this huge, Ager produced this huge customer experience facility that you can see pictures of, and it was never at full capacity. It was never being used fully. And so then they thought about it, let's go to this supplier. And they went to the supplier and said, would you like to be able to use part of our customer experience facility whenever we're not using it? And then also you could build us something that we could use and you could use to demonstrate your product. The supplier was so thrilled, so excited. On top of the already aggressive discount schedule they had, they gave them another 50% discount to what they were buying. And so again, it's investigative negotiations and value creation. The state of Oregon was having an issue with, they were telling everybody to use less electricity, but then they had lights everywhere where they were using so much electricity, and they were being hypocritical. So they decided we needed to get solar. The problem was they didn't have the money for solar, and this was when solar first came out, and it was really expensive. And so they thought about it, then thought about, we don't have the money for this, how do we do it? Finally, they came out with, what keeps our industry awake at night? It's the competition, because all solar suppliers are the same. And so they put a bid out there that says, who wants to do solar for free in return for us putting on our website that you did our solar? Well, companies lined up. They lined up, and so they got complete solar for the state capitol building for free. They just had to put it on the website, and they had to send out a couple of tweets, and they were able to get it done. Again, investigative negotiations and value creation. So now, let's shift to what does procurement greatness look like? We've talked about all the failure stories. We need to talk about success and something inspiring. On August 1st, 2007, in Minneapolis, Minnesota, the I-35 West Bridge collapsed. And it was a disaster. It started with the center section. All the other sections started to collapse. There was 13 deaths, 145 injuries, a school bus full of children ready to fall in that thankfully didn't. Daily traffic was 150,000 vehicles a day, and the weight of the world was on the procurement department of the Minnesota Department of Transportation. Now, the traditional procurement approach would have been a cost-plus, low-bid approach for contracting. There would have been cost overruns, time overruns. This is the standard in construction. The best place to lose all your hair is in construction. If any of you are interested in that, that's the place to go do it. It's a stressful area to work in for procurement. The contractor has little incentive to innovate and drive innovation. The contractor has little incentive to bring costs down. And then it would take up to 5 years before the construction would even begin. And so what were they going to do? And so they researched, and they found out there was a statute that allowed them to use alternative procurement strategies. And they thought, okay, this is an opening, we're going to jump through it. And they did. Now, they drove an agility and innovation model. The first thing they did was they shifted to a new approach. They solicited for performance results and also for supplier innovation, because this was a bridge with 150,000 cars going through. They could not take their time with this. They had the traditional way would take 8 years. The performance risks were shifted to the supplier, which is what you want. When it's the supplier's idea, then you can shift the contractual risk of performance to the supplier. And then the selected general contractor brought some game-changing innovations in how bridges were built. And so the procurement strategy allowed for the general contractors to have a lot of autonomy and flexibility in how they build it. Now, remember this. For instance, remember the light poles in Texas. When it's your idea, then you're responsible for the outcome. When it's the supplier's idea, if you write the contract properly, it's their responsibility for the outcome. And that's always what you want. And so they shifted that burden to them. It was a hybrid approach of best value, which means lowest total cost, and also design-build strategy, which meant that the supplier designed it and then built it. And there was no change orders. If you don't know, in construction, this is how the suppliers make all their money, is with change orders. There was no change orders allowed, no cost overruns, zero. And then they used delivery delay incentives. For every day the supplier was late, there would be a $200,000 liquidated damage. Conversely, for every day they were early, there was a $200,000 incentive, and it was worth it. Doing this resulted in improved speed, design flexibility, construction innovation, and game-changing results. What came about as a consequence? First off, bridges are typically built one section at a time. They invented this concept of self-propelled modular transporters that allowed them to build the whole bridge at the same time, and these modular transporters brought the components. They were able to assemble each major component in hours, when it used to take months. It used to take months for each section. But with these self-propelled modular transporters, they were able to do what always took months in bridge construction in just a matter of hours. The next thing they put in, Minnesota gets very cold. I hope they don't have LED traffic lights. They put in an automated anti-icing system, which is unheard of in bridges. They used, if you don't know, anything below 8 centigrade and you can't pour concrete. You cannot pour concrete below 8 centigrade, 46 degrees in the Fahrenheit system. And so in Minnesota, that's half the year. You know, construction stops. All that pouring of concrete, you can't do it during those temperatures. And so they created something they hadn't done before because they were working through the winter. They created heated work tents that created a biosphere of, or if you like, a micro-temperature area, whatever you want to call it. And they created those heated work tents, and then they used river water. Instead of making the concrete off-site, they brought river water in to make the concrete. All of these were new innovations. And so by having these heated work tents, there was no stoppage in concrete because of temperature reasons. Then they did another first innovation. They used photocatalytic concrete that took the dirty air and cleaned it and put it back into the environment clean, which is just incredible. Then they put in 240 bridge sensor monitoring systems in place so that they would always know if there was problems, because this other bridge had problems and they weren't aware of the magnitude of those issues. And so procurement greatness means this. The new bridge was finished 2 years ahead of normal schedule, and if you account for the normal 5-year period before construction starts, and then the 3-year period of construction, instead of 8 years, they built it in 1 year and 17 days from the time the bridge collapsed. This was just phenomenal. Then it was millions below budget. There was no time lost due to safety incidents, much lower maintenance cost schedule, and the new bridge won over 20 design awards and innovation awards for the final result. And so what I want you to know, ladies and gentlemen, life is a lot better without shackles. We don't need to self-impose these on ourselves. My call to action to you is to first stop buying goods and services, start buying performance results. The next thing is to drive savings opportunities in the scope of work and spec design phase. Chief Procurement Officers, I'm putting this responsibility on you to start driving this change for 18% average savings. Leverage value creation strategies and investigative negotiations with suppliers for improved outcomes. And get procurement a seat at the table and get us off the menu for lunch. And what we want is we want to get out of this fishbowl on the left that is a source of overhead and overhead providers, and procurement needs to go into this other bowl. And someone told me it looks like the fish is not going to make it. The fish is going to make it, I promise, and we will be a value-added center of profit that gets funded and treated as a center of profit by the executive staff. So I want to thank you so much for having me here. Any of you who would like to reach out to discuss in-house capability building, which is elevating of your procurement organization's capability, consulting or conference speakership, please do that. Thank you again for having me here. It's been my pleasure.
Woo! A real worldwide rockstar in procurement, Omid G. Thank you so much.